Well, Melissa, I hate to say I told you so. That's a lie. I love to say that. I'll say it because look, we were talking about how all the activity was on the low end of the market, and it continues to be on the low end of the market. 70% of home sales were below $250,000, and that inventory supply is drying up. I'm talking to people out in California, and they're saying there's just not enough to keep pushing those sales forward. When you get above $250,000, you don't have the first-time home buyers who are taking advantage of the tax credit. That market is dead, and that is finally showing up in these numbers.
Steve Leisman, on the other hand, is there any doubt that all the measures of housing, all of them have bottomed, and in fact bottomed 5 or 6 months ago?
You know, I think what's interesting here is Wall Street's been so concentrated on following Washington and bailouts, it's forgot how to read an economics news release, okay? I look at this report and I say, you know what? What did we have? 7% in the prior month? Let me just double check on that. And so it trailed off a little bit this month and had a little bit of give back. Plus, you read the news release and you see the economists for NAR saying, you know what? The closings might have been delayed because there was such a surge through, the system couldn't process it. So when I look at the details, I do not see reason.
Interesting. Steve, I talked to the chief economist, and he said it could be a delay due to the home appraisals and due to closings, but he also said that a lot of, I'm not talking about the news release. I talked to him directly. I'm saying he said he is also seeing a lot of these sales not coming to fruition. A lot of these contracts signed are not happening. They're being canceled.
That's true.
Because of the mortgage rates and because of mortgage availability and because of the appraisal process.
30% are foreclosures and 30% are first-time home buyers. So there's still a lot of that working its way through the system. It is off the bottom. It is not anywhere near what it was. It still requires government assistance, but it is just not the time to look at this number. Let me
which
finish,
one of these two is right?
You can't look at this number and say the rebound in housing is over.
Dennis, which one of these two is right? They're disagreeing.
I think the rebound is going to take a long time. I think we may be bumping along the bottom, and we could still go down a little bit further. You got to look at all the fundamentals into the housing market at this point in time. The government has been. Steve's right. Government's been propping it up. It's like a patient on crutches. We got to find a way. The government's got to find a way to wean the patient off the crutches to really get that solid core existing home sales as opposed to those
or extend the first-time buyer credit. I mean, there's talk of that too.
A big positive in this report, though, that I want to point out is that inventories do continue to fall, and that is very important in this market. You're seeing still declining inventories. You're seeing that in the new homes as well, and that inevitably has got to stabilize prices.
Larry, can I make a case here? I'm just interested in this idea of first-time home buyers versus foreclosures, and I want to ask you, Larry, this idea, whether or not there's efficacy in the idea of the government program that seems to fund the first-time buyers, and that seems to help whittle down the foreclosures. It seems to me that is a government program that makes some sense because you can pay me now or pay me later. If the foreclosures end up being losses to the banks, it's going to hurt on the back end. If you can get first-time buyers to buy these foreclosures, and I realize it's not one for one, it seems to me that extending that may make some sense.
Well, Steve, you know, I really appreciate your courtesy, respectful, incisive question, but my answer is no. I don't want the government to help at all. I want them to stay the heck out of this. I want prices to adjust, and I want buyers and sellers to adjust. I think that's the best way to get out of this. I have no doubt that the whole housing story has bottomed, month-to-month bounces notwithstanding. I want to ask my friend Diana, though. You interviewed the FHA commissioner yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. Are they going broke? And what is the impact on this whole story from these cheap, ridiculous 3.5% down loans, which makes my blood boil because it tells me we've learned nothing.
Same problem all over again.
Same problem all over again.
Let me answer the question.
How big a factor is the FHA going broke here?
The FHA claims it's not going broke, and they're basing that on estimates of what the default rates are going to be. If those estimates are incorrect, yes, they could be in a lot more trouble than they're in, but according to their estimates, they say they will be able to meet any of those default rates. However, the FHA share right now is so much higher. Remember, during the peak of the housing market, FHA was not even a blip. It was 2% of the loans in this nation FHA backed. Now they're upwards of 25 to 30% going forward, and they're getting even bigger. They barely have, they don't even have the chief risk officer in place yet. They just announced they're going to hire one. Why haven't they hired one in the last 75 years? I'm not going to ask that. Yes,
Dennis,
I am.
let me get you to weigh in on the FHA impact and just related to that. Don't we put too many government-sponsored resources into housing, for heaven's sakes? I mean, what about manufacturing? What about transportation? I mean, I'm so sick to death of coddling housing with bad loans.
Larry, I think you're right. We could talk about this, but housing's always been used as a support program in the government. Personally, I would like to see a little more of some of the dialogue move over to the business investment side. It's shocking to me that everyone keeps talking about a recovery in the economy. It's 70% is consumer spending. That's what got us into trouble. This sort of low interest loan got us into trouble. I'd love to hear more discussion about business investment and tax credits. Those create jobs, which eventually buy the homes at this point. I have to add one other thing, too. You know, one of the good sidebar stories here is the banks continue to make money on these mortgages. The spread is very attractive, and maybe that is probably the best news here, because as the profits come rolling in, the banks get a little bit healthier, and the residential market is a big moneymaker for most banks.
But, Dennis, it sounds like you don't think the housing market has bottomed.
I don't think it's bottomed. Everything's relative. I think it's at the bottom, near the bottom, bouncing around. But I think there is a real possibility that you pull away the crutches too soon. And unfortunately, Larry, the government's the only one that can support the crutches. If you pull away those too soon, yeah, you could have a negative snapback.
Yeah, but Steve,
and I think that's what people are worried about.
I don't agree that it hasn't bottomed. And furthermore, you look at these major markets in California, Nevada, Arizona, Florida, at low prices, and I admit prices have dropped in some cases 50%. Sales have been rising for 6, 8, 12 months, Steve Leisman. The market is working if only we would let it.
The market is working, and some of the things that the government is doing make sense to me, and some don't. I think the idea of providing financing to people who are willing to take risk when the private market itself has completely pulled back to a ridiculous degree from providing that service makes sense to me, Larry.
About a 20% down payment, a normal down payment.
A 20% down payment makes sense, but I think
instead of this phony 3.5% down payment,
but Larry, when you get buyers into the market, even at 3.5% down, if they're paying the insurance premiums, Larry, and you're getting more home buyers into the market who are sucking up more of these homes, and you're getting them to own homes, which fuels the economy even more because then they renovate those homes. It's not a bad thing to get buyers into the market as long as they have the insurance
to cover it. It's the most overestimated central planning, industrial policy to housing in history of the earth.
I need to make one
until we get off.
We gotta go.
Get off.
We gotta go.
Why are we benefiting housing? Help manufacturing.
We're gonna have to turn off everyone's
The
microphone.
alternative is owning.
That's it. It's over.
We have to go.
Diana, Dennis, Steve, thanks to all of you for joining.